In this short video, we'll look at the settlement of Texas, which was going on in 1836. By the 1830s, of course, Americans remained committed to growing westward. For several years, Americans had been settling into the Spanish lands of Tejas, and that was especially true along the Gulf of Mexico. But Americans had declared that they would give up any claims to those lands with the Adams-Onis Treaty. And the thing is that by the 1820s, Spain had lost control of this land, and Mexico had won its independence. And the Mexican government, they were fighting Comanche and Sioux Indians in the plains, and they wanted sort of a buffer zone. And what they did was they invited Americans to settle into what to them was northern Mexico, and they would allow that as long as they obeyed all Mexican laws, and that would serve as sort of protect them from these Comanche and Sioux Indians. And because this area in East and South Texas was good cotton lands, by the 1830s, many Americans were settling there, and they brought with them, I might add, some of that plantation cotton culture, and that meant slavery was spreading into Texas as well. Now, the thing is, by the 1830s, of course, there were enough people there that the Americans that they didn't want to be part of Mexico, even in spite of their promises, and they began a revolt. Leading the Americans was a Missouri resident named Stephen F. Austin, who had gained from Mexico a huge land grant originally given to his father by Spanish authorities. And by the 1830, there were over 20,000 white American settlers and over 1,000 black slaves in Texas. As I say, they were demanding independence. The Mexican ruler, General Santa Anna, was of course worried, and he declared, in essence, martial law in Texas. On March 2nd, 1836, the Texans declared their independence. They said a declaration of causes, they called it, and it was sort of remind you of the Declaration of Independence in America. Santa Anna advanced on Texas with a huge army of over 5,000 men. He first met resistance at a small village of San Antonio, where a band of about 189 volunteers held up in an old Spanish mission known as the Alamo. They were led by Colonel William B. Travis of South Carolina, and including such notables as Davy Crockett, famed Tennessean frontiersman, and Jim Bowie, who had been inventor of the famous Bowie knife. And here you can see a picture taken not long after the battle, and of course, the Alamo today in downtown San Antonio, shown on the top left. For 12 straight days, the Mexicans launched frontal assaults with fearsome losses. Finally, on the 13th day, March 6, 1836, the Mexicans broke through the wall and they killed all the American combatants left. The only survivors were 16 women, children, and servants. It cost the Mexicans 1,544 casualties, but just as important, it helped other Americans buy time to build up their defenses. Today, of course, the Alamo is famous in Texas lore, romanticized in books and movies. It is going to be people of the other Texans would, of course, say, remember the Alamo, as Texans do today. The Texans that remained were led by the Tennessee frontiersman named Sam Houston. He had been in Texas only 3 years, and he'd been preparing his army, and his army was fortunate that the Mexicans were delayed. With time to organize, Houston attacked the advancing Santa Anna at the Battle of San Jacinto, near, of course, the present-day city of Houston. Texans were yelling, remember the Alamo, and the attack took place in April 1836. The Texans won, and Santa Anna was taken prisoner, and a number of Mexicans defected during the battle. Mexico hadn't admitted defeat, and they still claimed a lot of the land that Texas claimed. And the Americans there, they wanted to be part of the United States. They wanted to be a new state. And so, they're going to try to apply to become a state. But in the United States, the northern states worried about a large new slave state, so they resisted it. And so Texas had established their own country, and they became the Republic of Texas. And showing there that they really saw themselves as Americans, they adopted a flag that resembled the United States but had one star, and so the Republic of Texas became known as the One Star State. It's going to last until 1845. So the Republic of Texas lasted until finally in 1845 the United States admitted Texas. Texas began to print its own money and act like a real permanent country. It elected its new president in 1838, Mirabeau Bonaparte Lamar, who talked of Texas growing westward to the Pacific. Lamar began negotiations with France and Britain, who saw the new country as a potential new source of cheap cotton. Many Texans, however, still wanted to join the United States. The United States, by the 1840s, was becoming worried about, my gosh, by not admitting this new country as a state, we've created another rival. And so that was a reason part of the reason the United States finally allowed Texas to join the Union in 1845. In any event, this concludes the video on Texas in 1836.